We'll call our, what is the date today? August 18th, Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Our sole item today is a presentation from the city attorney about a very riveting topic, which I will keep you all on the edges of your seat for. Alderperson Kilps, please don't tell everyone how exciting this presentation is. I can't tell if you're smiling under your mask, but I'll take it as a yes. Gross.
I have to talk into the mic, and this is a really weird setup because we have the two screens back there, and then this is in the middle, and I can't move too far away from my computer. So, I just wanted to, before we started, I have to take this off. I can't talk and do it at the same, and have a mask on at the same time. I wanted to just review a couple of resources available to you as elected officials, so that you're aware that these are out there. Common Council, procedure is governed by Watertown Ordinance Chapter 114. So if there's ever any procedural questions, Watertown has some of their own procedural rules, and those are listed in Chapter 114. So if you ever see me looking at, I'll have to look first at state statute, then I'll have to look at our ordinance to make sure our ordinance doesn't supersede Robert's rules or anything like that, or state statute as far as that goes. So that's one of the things I wanted to make you aware of. Additionally, the League of Wisconsin Municipalities website, also under legal, has frequently asked questions, and these are organized really well by topic. So any one of these, if you have questions that you don't want to ask me, or you're just curious, there's lots of interesting facts in these. So like appointments and vacancies. What is the proper procedure for filling vacancies in the city or village offices? All sorts of stuff. So this is a really good resource as well. Additionally, Department of Justice has a Office of Open Government, an entire page from the Department of Justice that governs open meetings and open records. And then the UW extension, and I should have just taken one of these PowerPoint presentations. The local government center of the UW extension has an entire site just for local elected officials. So there's fact sheets or frequently asked questions, and this is separate from the league. This is a totally other resource. And then there's, for example, agendas and minutes for local government. There's a PowerPoint presentation on that. So if you ever want to, I don't know, dig into local government, there's a lot of good stuff here, and I love the UW extension stuff because it's typically not super long, but it gets to what you need to know pretty quickly. And then, of course, there's Wisconsin statutes that are available online for free if there's ever any questions with those. So that being said, I will do this presentation. Oh, additionally, there also is a handbook for Wisconsin municipal officials. It's published by the league, and that's also, it can be purchased online, or I have it, or the clerk's office has it. It's for like $25 or $30, I think, online as well. So this is a really, really condensed version of what some of the more frequent questions that come through my office, the clerk's office sometimes, and the mayor's office as well, I think, as far as agenda setting and that kind of thing. So if there's any questions, please interrupt me. So open government is essentially, these are sunshine laws that have been developed in the last 15 years to make sure that the government, what is going on with the government is available to the public. And it protects, allows the public to have access to information. It protects you all as the decision makers against any sort of allegations that something backhanded happened or something was done behind closed doors, and allows everyone's interests to be represented because everyone has access to the same information. So open meetings applies when there's a body subject to open meetings law. So what that means is that's a quasi-governmental or governmental organization. Quasi-governmental organizations can even include subcontractors or things like that. So you have to be really careful in determining. You can't just contract something out because you don't want it to be subject to open meetings. That's not allowed under the open meeting law. So you have to be careful to make sure that certain bodies still fall under the open meetings law. Quorum, the quorum question is the numbers game. So if a quorum or a negative quorum of a body is present, that is the equivalent of a meeting. And where you get caught up, so quorum's pretty easy. Okay, is there a quorum of a body present, 50% or more present at a location? The negative quorum gets a little tricky, and that means, is there enough of a body present to defeat an action? So that gets a little tricky, and you're not really aware of that. Like if there are enough members of a committee present to defeat an action, that would also be a negative quorum and would constitute a meeting under the numbers test. And also the purpose is the other reason. What is the purpose of the meeting? If the purpose of the gathering is to talk about my son's 4-year-old birthday party, obviously that's not a government purpose. If the purpose is to discuss what happened at a recent public works meeting, that would be a purpose, that would be the governmental purpose and would fall under the definition of a meeting. So again, the two main issues are numbers, purpose. That's the Showers test that's been litigated over and over again. So numbers and purpose. So that's always, even if you're going out for coffee and you're worried, like, you just have to go through, is there a quorum of people present? I mean, there's no reason that you can't socialize with people that are on council. And if some of you are personal friends or what, I don't know anybody's connections to each other, but there's no reason for you to not do that. However, just make sure that you're careful in what you're actually discussing and making sure it's not falling under that purpose test under the open meetings law. So there are certain requirements for open meetings. So the notice requirements have to be at least, so the timing, I'm skipping around, but the timing has to be at least 24 hours prior to the meeting, absent emergency circumstances. An emergency meeting can be called up to 2 hours ahead of the meeting. However, that should only be used in very rare circumstances when there's a bona fide emergency. This isn't oops, I forgot that we're going to have a meeting. It has to be a legitimate emergency, and that would fall under the 2-hour notice. Otherwise, it has to be at least 24-hour notice prior to the meeting in which the notice was posted. It needs to be posted in a variety of locations, and I believe, and I don't know this off the top of my head, the locations that the city uses. Alyssa, can you remind me what locations we physically post at?
City Hall, Senior Center, and the library.
Library, that's what I thought. So City Hall, Senior Center, and Library are physical posting of physical notices. And then there's also posting on the city website. And I believe the notices are put out for convenience to the Daily Times. However, they don't typically publish those. That's separate from legal notices, which the Daily Times does publish, and that's required under our publication for different types of like public hearings and those kind of things. So, and to whom? So there's a provision in the open meetings law that says that anyone who requests to receive notice, we are obligated to do that. So there are certain people, if you ever look at that long email stream that you get when the agendas go out, you notice that there are some people on there that aren't elected officials or, that maybe aren't staff members. That's because those individuals have requested to be given notice of the meetings, and we're obligated to comply with that. Are you trying to do something to add? Oh, okay. And the last requirement on notice is specificity. And I put old business, manager's report. That is no longer, according to Department of Justice, that's no longer allowed. You can't just put old business and discuss any topics you want. Or a manager's report, which we previously had used pretty frequently to just kind of as a catch-all. Well, the whole point to putting the notice down on an agenda is so that members of the public who are interested in that topic know what you're going to talk about, and they can come and be heard. And putting something under manager's report that potentially could be controversial or maybe even not controversial, someone would just want to know. So that's why we avoid, if you ever hear myself, the clerk's office, or any city staff saying, hey, you need more specificity, it's not because I don't want you to talk about that topic. It just means you need you need to clarify it so that the public, we can avoid an complaint from the public. So, and there are times when things come up in the course of a meeting that you'll say, oh, I wish we could talk about that. And outside of saying this, let's make sure we add this to the agenda next time or next, something like that, you should avoid going too deep into discussion. You can just say, oh, we'll talk about it next time. Another instance this happens in council, and this happened last time, I believe, is the public comment period. It's very difficult not to respond because you all are public servants and you all want to be responsive when someone comes in and says something. Unfortunately, your hands are tied with the public comment because we're not allowed, we're not allowed to respond to the comments made by the public unless they're noticed. And again, a way to say, thank you for your comments, we'll add that to the agenda, or thank you for your comments, we'll refer that to X committee if you want to. Otherwise, outside of that, you can't really engage in a discussion, even though often you may really, really want to. And the last and final thing about, just touched upon it for meetings, are closed session versus open session. There are a variety of, I would say, 8 to 10 exclusions that are qualified for closed session. However, those have to be noticed beforehand, and we have to make sure that they fit within that. We also, and this is another change that, since I've been here for 2 years, but since I've been here, we've been slowly changing over. You should not vote in closed session unless voting in open session would negate the reason to be in closed session. So, if you're talking about negotiating for the purchase of property, and the reason to be in closed session is because you don't want the other party to know what the maximum amount of money that you would pay for that property would be, obviously you don't want to say that in open session or vote on that particular item in open session. However, there are other situations where once you've decided to approve of something or once you've decided to move forward, there's no reason to vote in closed session. And the Department of Justice has indicated that voting in closed session should be a minority of the time. It shouldn't be the majority of the time that you're in closed session and voting. So I talked about the walking quorum. Well, I didn't talk about it. A walking quorum. I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but if you're walking in a group outside the meeting tonight, you could have what's called a walking quorum. It could be a quorum of the body, and if you're rehashing what just happened at the meeting, that potentially could be official business, and that could create a walking quorum. So again, be careful in how you gather and what you talk about. Purely personal matters or non-City of Watertown related matters are fine, but it just be cautious. And also be cautious with electronic communications. In a different city, not this city that I worked for, there were alders who texted back and forth about making motions. So they would say, one gentleman would text, well, it was the mayor in this case, would text the mayor and say, do you want me to make that motion? And the mayor would text back during the meeting, oh yes, please make that motion. All during the meeting while discussion was taking place. And then it got weird. And I would just caution you against texting between each other during meetings because we could create some issues. Any discussion on the matter on the agenda should take place verbally out loud if at all possible. Also avoid replying all on some of those emails, and you guys have been doing really good with this. And I mean, as far as I've seen, most emails that are addressed to all Common Council, I think everyone has been pretty good about responding to the sender only, or not responding with everybody involved. The problem with that is if you do reply all with everyone, that could create a meeting. And as silly as that sounds, you can have a meeting via email under the Department of Justice guidance. How to avoid this? One-way communication. Reply to a person. Send a letter. Avoid putting everybody on it, even though you want everyone to know. Just avoid that if at all possible. And I already talked about the citizen comments during meetings. And additionally, even in this applies across the board. It applies to committee meetings. It applies to common council meetings. Obviously, those are all bodies that it applies. Do you want to say something?
The only thing that I'll add is sometimes I'll ask Rachel to send stuff, and we were advised that it's better if a non-elected official sends the mass emails versus an elected official. And sometimes I'm not as successful at that, but I would want to know, why does she do it and why doesn't she? Sometimes if I'm sitting in your shoes, I should do it more consistently. We were just told that at the chief executive conference last year. I don't really know what the difference is, but that's what they told us. So if you see that differentiation, that's why.
And this picture is it's from a different state, so it's not from us, but it's just a screenshot of somebody on Facebook typing out what happens at a meeting. And I know I haven't seen this happen here, like on live feed, but there have been people in other communities I've worked for that'll just sit on Facebook and post and post and post. They'll be sitting in the back row and they'll just be posting and posting. And what is tempting is when you're getting those alerts on your phone because you're friends with that person or it's part of a group, and then you want to reply back. I've also had that happen in a different city. Don't do that. Don't do that. Because then there was the allegation that there was a meeting taking place on Facebook. So there was the Common Council meeting taking place, and then there was this other meeting taking place on the Facebook page between these two people. So the alder person, she was responding, and it was not good, and that received a little bit of negative press. So I couldn't include the actual example, but this is another example that was happening in a different state. So be careful. So I said I would keep this really short. So I have like 10 minutes. So I'm going to breeze through open records. Generally, whatever.
It totally just reminded me of the Mighty Ducks. No? I'm the only one that's seen Mighty Ducks when they start flapping their wings. What? Really?
Sorry.
I've seen it. Don't worry.
Read of them. They're like epic films from my childhood. Go home and rent them. Your kids will love them. Sorry, Rose.
It's okay. Mighty Ducks is way more interesting than this. So generally, again, that open records was created in order to give the public information about what the government's doing. What are they communicating about? What are they doing? So a records custodian is any person who maintains the records. So you all are custodians for your own records. So any communications that are occurring about official city business could be requested of you. You can't, if you're using your City of Watertown email to talk about, again, my 4-year-old's birthday party, again, that's purely personal. That does not qualify. Or if you're talking about where you're going to go to dinner with your wife or whatever, that is purely personal. That isn't disclosed. However, other things would fall under that. And this is, again, aside, I'm not following my PowerPoint very well, but the most irritating thing for public officials when I've had to go through their phones or go through their emails, and thousands of emails I've had, stacks, of printed out emails of, 2 reams of paper. The irritating thing to the public officials is, well, let me go through it. I'll just sort out what's city business and what's not, and I have to do it. So unfortunately for me, I have, I had to go through some pretty personal information. So, and it's uncomfortable, and the city elected official didn't want me to see all that stuff, and I personally really didn't want to see it either, but somebody had to go through it. So I would just caution you from mixing too much personal work on your city email account, because eventually somebody, if there's a request for all emails that have the word park in them, or all city emails that have the word, sometimes people will request their name. Any emails with the name Rose Simon Silva in it. I mean, that would create thousands and thousands and thousands of emails, because I email frequently. So I would just caution you from using too much your city email for too much personal things. I would also caution you from using your personal email for city things as well, because that, again, I would have to, me or whomever is assisting with the open records request would have to go through your personal email or your personal cell phone. Text messages count, those are a record. Videos count, those are a record. Facebook posts count. We currently capture all of our Facebook posts and retain them as part of our records retention schedule to make sure that those are retained, because even what we say in social media is a record that someone could request down the road. So it's not just a paper. Just because you don't print something doesn't mean it's not a record. I guess we're kind of getting over that hurdle now, because people are catching up with that. But just so you know that it doesn't matter if it's a paper form. Additionally, another thing that elected officials, but sometimes city staff, and I'm not saying just generally, have an issue with, is that the identity of the requester, we don't need to know that. We don't have to we can't request them to identify themselves. It can be the voters of, voters 2020 for fair and open government can request hundreds and hundreds of documents, and we have no idea why, and we have no idea who they are, but they can still request them. So again, that can be frustrating, because you're like, why do you want all these emails? Why do you want all this financial documents? And we don't know, and we may never know. And we have to go through the work of reviewing them, retaining them, and physically copying them. So there are a few things that are in a record, like I said, purely personal, obviously. Drafts, notes, and preliminary documents are not records. Those do not have to be disclosed. And then certain things like published materials. There's a few other exemptions. I just went through some of the more popular ones. If someone requests a copy of Huckleberry Finn, we can say no to that. Like, we don't have to make you a physical copy of Huck Finn. You can go to the library and check it out. That's not something that we have to do. And the fees, not that we never recoup all of our fees for open records requests, never. The amount of time it takes to compile them and copy them, we can charge and redact sometimes if there's confidential information. Redaction charges we cannot get reimbursed for. So there are the open records equation usually results in substantial staff time and doesn't result in a lot of reimbursement. We can charge copying, we can charge location, so physically going to the file room and locating a file, we can charge for that, but we can't charge for a lot of the other costs that are associated with open records requests.
How many open records requests have we had in the last year or two?
Do you know the police department alone, that number? Do you remember off the top of your head?
For how long are you asking, did you say?
How about the last year?
Hundreds for us.
But
We
to
get
non-
several a day.
Oh, wow.
To non-PD, because a record request is saying, I want my case record. Like, you arrested me, and I want to know everything you have on arresting me.
But we get all sorts of open records, like we'll get attorneys' offices who want copies of crash reports for the last month because they want to go through them, and so we get all sorts of records requests like that, so.
So non-PD ones, Elissa, how many would you say we get in a year?
Probably 15.
Yeah, it was around
maybe.
10, so.
One a month? About one a
Yeah,
month then?
she said about 15.
Okay.
We're getting more now that we're in election season
Oh.
from groups.
And engineering gets, each department, because each department is their own custodian for their own records. I don't provide the clerk's records my department. The clerk's office provides their own, they're each the custodian of their own records, just like you guys are custodians of your records. So if someone walks up to you on the street and says, hey, Alderperson Ritten, I'll use you as an example, you represent my district, I want to know what you're doing. Can I have a copy of your calendar from the last month? That's a record. If you use the Outlook on your city email. Where are you? What are you doing? Related to city business. Now, we would redact all of your personal, like my kid's doctor's appointments or whatever you have on there, or business, your personal business. But if someone wanted to ask for that, they could. And that's where it gets, and it doesn't have to be a written request. And I want to be clear, it can be verbal. So people who call, and that happens a lot with your department. There are a lot of people who call the police department and say, I want the crash report or the accident report. I want a copy of the ticket. I want a copy of this. They still take those. They write them down and hopefully get the information they need from the person, but that's still a records request. So whenever people verbally ask me, my practice is always like, oh, would you mind sending me an email? Oh, would you mind? And if they say no, then I have to write it down and I'll say, okay, I'll take down your information, blah, 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 blah. But just be aware that if they don't want to put it in writing, they don't have to. So that's just something to keep in the back of your head. Are there any other random questions? Sure.
Is there an issue with deleting emails?
Deleting emails. Well, nothing is ever deleted in your city email because we back up our server every 48 hours, 24.
Servers, the email server? I don't even know how often it's backed up, but the records are there. I think there's two different, because it's done here and it's done at wastewater, it's done in two different places because we back each other up. So I think everything gets backed up nightly, just every 48 hours here, because it's happening in two different places. So.
Do I delete junk email from my inbox? Yes, absolutely. Right. Do I delete any other emails? Typically, no. I don't.
But you could.
You
and
could.
And they're still on the email archiver.
Yeah, there's nothing, it's not like you're going to get accused of fraud or something for deleting emails. I'm a saver, I'm a filer, and I'm a saver. So that's me. And so I don't delete a lot of things. If you are the person who has to have the zero email or the zero inbox person, if that's you, well, I can see why you want to delete things. So that's just not me. So there's nothing illegal about deleting emails. Any other questions or things that have come up in meetings that you have questions about?
I think the easiest thing is just do all your city business in your city email, because then we take care of retaining the record. And if you get someone who I'll get people that contact me personally on social media, I just say to them, can you send that to me in an email? It's just a lot easier that way than saying, I have this in Messenger and trying to retain it. So just use the mechanisms that we provide, and we didn't always provide them. When I first started, we didn't have city emails. So it's much easier to do it this way. And if you end up doing any social media for your job, it's very helpful. I think it's a really great way to interact with your constituency, so I would really encourage it. But then just let us know, and we will also then archive your social media pages for you as well.
And as questions come up, feel free to reach out to Alyssa or I. We're willing. I mean, if there's ever a question on an agenda or a records request, I typically help with requests if they're complicated or there's a little, they're complicated typically is the requests that I become involved in. But like the police department, I thought your number was like 1,000 last year. That's what was in my head.
Yeah,
It was like 1,000 last year, I thought,
Probably.
at least. But they respond to those daily without any sort of assistance because they have to. And there's the Driver's Protection Act that they have to comply with. I mean, there's a lot of rules that we all have to comply with. So if there's ever any questions, please, feel free. That's my job. That's Alyssa's job. And you as well have a right to records. So if you ever want records, you have the same rights as the public does as well. So if you ever have any, want any information or documents, feel free to, I mean, that's just as much your right as the public as well. All right, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rose. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? Otherwise, take a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole.
Motion.
Thank you. Motion by Wetzel, seconded by Kilps. All those in favor, please say aye.
All right.
Opposed? Great. I don't think we have an invocation. We do not. So we'll get started right at 7. For anyone who is new, just as an FYI, when you see committee of the whole meetings, they're typically used as an informational session, whether we want to present a study or the audit or this. So if you can attend those, they're always beneficial too. If you can't, just let us know.